everyone, I'm Grandmaster Denes Boros, and this is Prepare Like a Pro. Now this actually won't be just preparing like a pro, a professional, but more like prepare like a world champion. So many of you, and I see all the people here, are excited about the match between Ding and Nepomniachtchi. So what we're going to take a look at is a perspective of how potentially the world champion prepared. Now, I don't have the leaked information. This is a PSA. I don't know what's going in their preparation. This is my take of how I think preparation went for Team Nepomniachtchi. So we're actually not going to focus on the game itself that was played. That is your homework to do, not mine. And we're just going to focus on what potentially may have inspired Nepo to play the way he did. Now, whenever you play an opponent, you sort of want to know what's the ballpark you sort of expect as an opening. So if we talk about openings, we kind of know what first move we'll see. Any ideas what first move we would see? And if you are a Fischer fan, you can't go wrong. So just a bit of a hint, these are the two main moves. These are the two main moves, and my arrow play is not the strongest, but it works. Yes? E4. E4, yes. So E4, and usually it leads to E5. This is not necessarily the only move, but it's sort of played exclusively at the top, especially by the Chinese Grandmaster Ding Liren. Anybody else, they often play C5, and we're talking about this. This has been played in the match Carlsen and Caruana, where famously Carlsen went for the Sveshnikov. So if you think that, chess is fairly tedious, everyone is just playing E5, that's not the case. Many players switch it up. They play C5, they even played E6 this World Championship, which hasn't been played for a long time now. The last time E6, so the French, was played was the Karpov-Korchnoi matches, which, if you know a lot about chess history, you may do, wasn't exactly a World Championship. It's supposed to be basically the candidates' finals who would meet Fischer. But Fischer, of course, never showed up, and that never really materialized. However, practically we can say that it was in the Karpov-Korchnoi matches where Korchnoi played the French a lot. And the last time, this time, E6 was played in the Ding Nepomniachtchi match. But back to our topic, whenever you're preparing, you're sort of preparing for the most likely choice. E5 is by far the most popular choice among the elite players, and of course it trickles down to lower levels as well. Now, E4, E5 in fact makes a lot of sense, because it not only gives you the square in the middle, it also restricts your opponent. And even though we talk a lot about center play, I really hope other lecturers do talk about it. Want to hear some nods? Yes, I can even hear it. Yes, good. So it's all about who controls more in the middle. That is the reason why moderns are not that popular, because the more space you get, the more likely you're going to control the game, because you can restrict your opponent's play. They can't really move pawns anymore to either C5 or E5, because I already occupied that square with my pawn. So E5 is a pretty good move, because not only does Ding would capture more space, but he also restricts White's play. Now that doesn't always stop people from playing F4, but we're going to leave it at that, and all the King's Gambit experts. So knight F3, knight C6, bishop B5. So the topic of the day, if you're just joining, is how Nepo probably prepared for his match as White in this opening. Anybody know the name of this opening? Yes.
Spanish.
The Spanish. This is the Spanish variation. So people play bishop b5 if they're extremely serious. This has been played by most of the super grandmasters, including the legendary world champions. Now, if we want to divide the ranking in the world, and it's sort of like an unofficial ranking, we'd say we've got super grandmasters who are very, very high rated, and we've got players who are sort of Hall of Fame or legendary. The legendary one is my extra take. That's how I would call them. So bishop b5 has been played by Kasparov, Carlsen, Anand. Everyone big and great player has played the Spanish with white. There are other moves that has getting more popular, but it doesn't make this less relevant even today. So he continues on. So knight f6 has been played in another game, but most of the time a6 and bishop e7 is played. Okay, so before we immerse ourselves in these games, which are basically some examples of how to play this opening, what are the big openings in the Spanish? There's actually two big ones, and both of them are fairly dreaded. Yes, go ahead.
Well, you could allow the marshal, or you could play like a closed Spanish, right?
Yeah, so one of the openings that's kind of dreaded and it's not really played, or isn't played in this match, is this one and d5. Now, this whole idea has a big history. So the inventor, Frank Marshall, from America, he hid this preparation for years so he can spring it on the legendary world champion, Capablanca. Now, unfortunately for him, it didn't quite work out. Capablanca won the game, but still the name stuck, and it's called the Marshall Gambit. Black practically sacrifices a pawn, but what black gets in return, and just for historic notice, knight f6 was played in that game, but that has been superseded by this pawn move, bishop d6 and queen h4. And even though white is up a pawn, these bishops are so strong and the attack is so naturally flowing that oftentimes white just decides to avoid this whole line. So this is something that Ding Liren plays all the time. So there comes the big question when you're preparing for a world championship match. Are you going to test your opponent in the very main line? This is the very main line of the opening. Or are you going to play something different? So he goes for d3. He's avoiding it altogether. Now, if we're going down to the basics, you have to remember that the point of bishop b5 is to threaten to capture on c6. Now, at this moment, though, it doesn't quite work. Takes. It doesn't quite work in the sense that if you capture on e5, then I have this move of queen d4, double attacking the pawn and the knight. So basically, you can't win the pawn. Now, this is, of course, a complex of its own and played by Fischer in some of his matches, but bishop a4 is considered to be the best. Now, does anybody know what is the strategy involving this bishop b5 to a4 move? If we're talking about pins, we're talking pins here. Although this is not a really classic pin, but a pin nonetheless. I'd still call it a pin. So why is this move going to a4 so good? Any guesses why this move could be good? So one of the points of pinning is that the knight can't really move away because it will have dire effects on the king, right? So if you move this bishop anywhere or you capture, you're sort of releasing the tension. So the goal that you set out to have will never actually go to full effect. So the reason you get your bishop to a4 is that you retain your threat and your pressure along this diagonal. And that's actually something very important to remember, because if you don't follow through your plans, oftentimes it's very, very hard to pinpoint your mistakes. So even though your plan may be flawed this way or the other, it's a good idea to still go through with it, because then you learn that, I'm a genius actually. Or you realize, oh, maybe I'm not such a genius after all. But you'd never know if you just capture on c6, because you sort of defeated your own concept. Is that clear? Mm-hmm. Makes sense? Okay, so bishop a4, knight f6, castles, bishop e7. Anytime they go d6, which would be a very logical move, then we already have this pin going on. Now, there are some ideas that's very important to remember. You usually want to defend this pawn and then get this pawn to c3, because if you go d4, they actually can shut out this bishop on a4. And this is actually a very, very famous little trick in this position for black. Black has an important idea which is sort of still related to this opening. So if we are already discussing the Ruy Lopez, or the Spanish as it's usually called, let's try to find a way. So if you're thinking for your opponent's side, they're sort of playing defense. They're trying to stop you from achieving your goals. For the moment, white is trying to use this whole pin along this a4, e8 diagonal. How can we try to reduce that, or minimize that effect? Chess is actually very straightforward. If you decide, okay, I don't like you, bishop, you just attack it with something of a lower value. And that's how it goes.
I don't like talking. I'm too shy to talk.
Okay.
I'll let you do all the talking.
All right. Okay,
I
I understand. That's okay. It's okay to be shy. Which piece are you thinking of moving? You don't have to move. You don't have to tell me what move. Tell me a piece.
So as black?
As black.
As black? But I don't understand why you didn't move it earlier.
Okay.
And I was still stuck on that.
Okay.
So I was.
Okay.
But no, you can go, I guess, bishop d7,
Mm-hmm.
pawn b4.
Yeah.
Or you could push.
Could push. You could go here. Mm-hmm.
There's,
Yeah.
but I was really stuck on, because I'm always in this position of why not what is that,
B5, yeah.
B5.
Yeah, yeah.
Why not that before?
Yeah, and that's correct. In fact, the move that you should be playing. And actually, both of your ideas are spot on. So bishop d7 is a bit more timid, but you're basically unpinning yourself. And in fact, it's an important technique to remember, because now you will never ever be in trouble. Oftentimes when people get in trouble is that they forget to unpin, and then I pin you, and because it's illegal to move the knight, you are going to lose something, a knight, a pawn, etc., etc. Now b5 here is actually very strong, and most of the times they do push this b pawn, because it chases away the bishop and it wins time, because of course the pawn's worth is just so low. So bishop b3, and now here comes the trap, exactly. Mamali, here comes the trap. Anybody? Yeah, go ahead.
You have knight d4, queen d4, c5.
Yes. So you take with the knight. because it kind of clarifies the situation. Now, if you are more cautious, I advise you to take with the pawn first. But the idea is the same. Because there is no pawn moves, c5, attack your queen, you move the queen, c4, and the bishop on b3 is trapped. And this is, I can tell you, the most painful way to lose a piece. Why? Because it's basically undone by your own pawns. If you would have any escape squares on a2 or c2, you'd be still fine. But because of that, your bishop is trapped. You could take here, but then, of course, it's still just down a piece for nothing. So this is actually a very important idea to remember, either if you don't want to fall for it as white, or as for black, if you want to trap your opponent's bishop. But back to the game. So bishop e7, it still doesn't work because then they take the pawn. So the gist is that you really can't take this pawn unless if you defend the e-pawn. So once d3 is played, if you wouldn't defend it, because of the fact that I defended my e-pawn already, I can take yours. So that's kind of the connection here. So b5, d6, it's basically very similar position. c3, castles, a4, bishop d7. It's all very standard. Okay. Now, before again we get into the nitty-gritty, let's think about pieces that are pretty horrendous for us as white. It's actually a good way of playing chess. Which one of your pieces are badly placed? Which one you could improve upon? The knight? Which one? Yep. Where would you put it? Yeah? Bishop c2, but they're going to play knight d2 now. So this is sort of interchangeable. What makes these Spanish positions interesting, this is not your swashbuckling, very sharp positions. These are more about strategy. Now, it's not that tactics don't happen ever, but it's more about the strategy, at least in the early phase of the game. So knight d2, very, very good. And that's actually the way you play this. You realize, oh, my pieces are awful. Let me just maneuver it to a better square. So bishop f8, knight f1, d5. d5 is also a very interesting move. However, I'm curious what you guys think of this. Is that just a pure positive to play this d5 move? You know, I'm very curious. Your take, chat, as well. Is this a pure positive? Or there's some downsides to this move? So I got the fairly simple answer of nope. However, that explains a lot. I mean, nothing. Yeah, it does weaken the e5 pawn over there. So chess is a game of give and take. Black decides to play pawn to d5, and that helps you to get a foothold in the center. However, once there's going to be a trade, as happens in the game, this pawn that used to be well guarded is a target. Early on, you had this very nice pawn structure which made sure there's no apparent immediate weakness in the position. Once you played pawn to d5, yes, you gained, so you could have more active pieces to play and piece placements, but you kind of weakened your structure, which kind of translates that in the long term you may face trouble. However, you know, there's the benefits of you can position your pieces to a better square. But okay, let's continue. d5 takes. So one of the benefits that you get in this position is that you get the knight in the center. So bishop d2, b4, a5. Now a5 is a key move. So as we're looking through this maze of ideas of the Ruy Lopez, we have to sort of mark ideas that are key. And a5 is a key idea. Now, but for that, we got to wonder, what could be the point of this pawn move? Yes?
You're just trying to fix the a6 pawn on the light square.
You're trying to fix the pawn on a6. That is true. Okay. Could there be some hidden agenda behind this pawn move? Yeah, it does block the a pawn, and it potentially can be a target. Yes, that's correct, Dennis Eldridge. That is correct. But there is some other ideas related to this. Yes, bishop a4. So the best moves in chess are moves that have manifold ideas behind them. So the fact that we fix this pawn, meaning the weak pawn that we'll be attacking all the time, can't move at all, but also we set up an idea such as bishop to a4, harassing that knight on c6 and putting pressure on the e pawn. So these are those moves that seem innocuous and tepid, but in reality they're very, very, very good, because you're setting up multiple threats, not just one. And by the way, if you guys have any questions, and that goes for chat, do feel free to ask away. I'll be more than happy to respond. So b takes, knight f6. So knight f6 is sort of a prophylactic idea, trying to put it on the square where the knight isn't loose. Knight f6, knight g3, rook b8, and here comes bishop a4. Bishop d6 over defending the pawn on e5. So at the moment, you could kind of argue that it's a balanced position. However, potentially that's a target, and this could be a target too. Now, if you may be wondering, knight takes a5 doesn't work because I can capture here. The rook on e8 is hanging. If you take here, I take here. Here I often see the knights next to each other on f3 and g3. What's the use of that? So the use of having these knights, they're kind of like extra defenders for your king. Now normally you have pawns in front and they're the bodyguards of your king. And that's just like extra helpers out there. But also they control some crucial squares in this position. Like they control center squares mostly. So if you don't know what you're doing in general, make sure your piece controls a square close to the middle. And there's a high chance you'll be doing the right thing. Sure thing, Aditya. So bishop d6, queen c2, knight a7. Okay. All right. So we talked about the position, but we didn't really talk about this thing called space, right? We didn't talk about it. Let's talk about it then. So space and the world we live in. Who has more space here? It's not a trick question. It's either white or it's black.
I would say, white probably in the queen side.
Mm-hmm. So the way you could tell, this is sort of the demarcation line for both sides. If you manage to break through that, that means you're sort of pushing your opponent off the board. If you can manage to get into their territory, it's more likely you have the space advantage, correct? Someone's asking, what's the dark matter? That's a Sagan question, so we're not going to encroach on Carl Sagan territory just yet. So a5, and we have that pawn fixed, Other than that, it's sort of even in the center. And I would kind of say that in general, if there's sort of a standstill in the middle, but you have a little bit of extra space on the side, you're more likely to have the advantage, or the slightest of advantage. The best advantage if you control the middle. All right, so bishop b3. Duda, if you don't know, is fairly well known for his fighting spirit, as you'll see. Bishop e6, trades, d4, just trying to open up in the middle. Knight c6, rook d1. E takes d4. And this next move is somewhat surprising, but not really, if you sort of understand the themes of chess. The themes of chess is always creating more weaknesses, right? So how can Duda, the legendary Polish player, create more targets in this position? Yes. Rook takes, very good. So in general, you want to have a smooth pawn structure where all of your pawns are hugging your king. There's no extra danger in that case. However, this structure is somewhat broken. It's kind of a bad Swiss cheese. Very stinky. Takes. And now there's two weaknesses in the position, not just one. So according to all chess knowledge, two weaknesses, that could be enough for a victory. Because if you double attack, they'll have to choose and one of them falls. Queen e8, rook e1, rook b5, trying to attack. Knight e4, takes, queen d7. So the maneuvering phase kind of ends right here and right now. However, Duda comes up with an excruciatingly nice move here. Duda is a real fighter, and whenever he can prolong the battle, he will find a way. e5 and d4 are weak too. Well, they're way more guarded, and it's easier to defend them than easier to defend these pawns than the ones on e6 and a6. So we talked about the fact that white's king is safer, right? White's king is much safer because there's no scattered pawn structures there. And actually, here Duda comes up with a move that is somewhat shocking, but not entirely shocking.
Bishop takes h6?
Yes. Pawn takes. So once we sacrifice, we have to be very aggressive with our next moves. Because otherwise, we just run out of time and then we say, good game, GG. So next move has to be an aggressive move. So aggressive move, it usually means it's going to be a check.
I was just trying to think,
Okay.
Queen g4?
Queen g4. Yeah, that's one way.
But I couldn't figure out queen
Yeah. So I'll tell you a bit of a secret. So whenever we're trying to figure out chess, one of them is reason and one of them is intuition. So if you follow the idea and say, okay, I think queen g6 is something that I feel or I believe might be the answer or the right move, try it. There's nothing to lose and a whole lot to gain, because you may just actually hit on the right move. Now, you can make the move, of course it can backfire, obviously, but on the other hand, oftentimes it's a big advantage if you trust your intuition, follow through with it and then try to prove it. Because sometimes we are on our own worst enemies. We are actually trying way too hard, and we just dissuade ourselves from playing the move that we thought in the first place. I did that just recently. I was really mad. So it happens to the best of us, and even me. So queen g6 actually was played. But really the bottom line is that trusting your gut is not necessarily a bad idea. Although at the end of the day, you will have to prove it how it works. Queen g6, very good. So if queen g7, there's a reason why this is horrible. Yes, go ahead.
You win the knight, queen e8, right?
Yeah, there's queen e8 check, and we pick up the knight on c6. And it's basically game on the highest level because black's king is very vulnerable, and also there's plenty of pawns that are going to fall. So they can go queen g7. They go king h8, which surprisingly is a mistake. Queen takes h6, queen h7, queen f6, queen g7. Now the question is, though, what if black goes king g8? Now what makes chess a bit more complicated is that you always have to be on the lookout for your opponent's moves and their ideas of maybe even mating us. I know, that's nasty, but that's how the game works. They can even try to mate us. So if we would want to take here, the problem is they might just back rank check us, and that does not look good. If takes, then there's this check. I heard some ideas. It's okay. There's no such a thing as a move. Every move that has an intention is a good move. And I actually even suspect what you said. I think I heard you. And if you don't mind, I'll share it if that's okay. It's okay? Yes. All right. So I believe you were thinking of moving the knight, right? No, so that's why I wanted to talk about it. This move actually would be pretty good if not for black's counterplay. So your knight was defending this square. Now you sort of left it hanging. But if I wouldn't have that idea, this move would be very, very strong because the queen usually is working very well with the combination with the knight. So if I would just move away, then you just take here, and you are setting up plenty of threats. So in general, it's a good idea to involve the knight with the queen. Unfortunately, we do run into this idea, but that does not diminish the fact that this is a viable way of playing the game. Okay? So I hope that answered knight g5. So here the best move is to take on e6. After this, we can even just go here and take another pawn. And we actually are up a ton of pawns at this moment. I've got like 3 pawns, and that's exactly the value of a piece. Plus the king is sort of breezy over there on g7. Okay, so queen g7 was played. Queen takes e6. And here, Wojtaszek listened to his inner Yasser and took the pawn. What a mistake. You can only do it if you're a Yasser Saravan. But knight d4 is a grave, grave mistake, and it is white to move and win the game. So oftentimes that is a giveaway, is to just decide which part of the board you're going to look at. Which side of the board should we look at? And I'm asking everyone, including you, chat, and live audience. Check the miserable king. And you know, check with purpose, never in spite.
Queen H3.
Okay. But are you checking with purpose or just a spite check?
No, because
Okay.
when I go rook, whereas he removes his queen to block, and I go rook e8.
Okay, so
Then-
check here. I'm following. I'm trying to follow.
I try to follow mine too.
No, so it's fine. I'm following. So check, king g8.
Rook e8.
Okay. If I move my bishop.
Then I sit down it.
Mm.
Move your bishop. Then, yeah.
Yep. So it makes sense, and I appreciate the fact you're trying to involve as many as you possibly can, and that's the way you should do it. The more pieces you have attacking, the better. Yes, go ahead.
Does Queen E8 win the knight? After
E8.
Queen E8, if you block with the queen, you can just exchange and take. And
Yes, but what if I don't? What if I go here?
And then just Queen E4, right? And then
Queen e4. Okay, I can move my knight.
oh,
Or queen e5.
Queen what?
No.
Yeah, so we can't quite go these squares because it's guarded by that sneaky rook on b5.
Yeah.
Yep, so that doesn't quite work. So most of you try to involve as many pieces as possible. You haven't quite considered the idea of luring away the defender. So your goal should be to lure away that few defenders that Wojtaszek has in the position. Okay, so what are you thinking? I know you're the one in the back. You're giving the advice, but it's your idea.
Okay, I really.
Go ahead. No, it's
I
fine.
do not know anything.
That's fine. That's fine.
This game.
There's
I'm
no,
just wondering why does that black knight not take that the queen?
it's white.
because it is white's turn.
Oh, okay.
So, and if you want to avoid that, what would you do? Being taken by the knight. What would you do as white?
Yeah, knight takes knight, then the queen takes queen h5, king g8, rook
Oh,
e8.
you're saying, okay, so yeah, the white knight take that.
Yeah. So, exactly. Now, you may be wondering, okay, what a random way, but it's actually not that random. So sometimes just for the fact that you fear for something can help you find the right solution. You're like, oh my goodness, my queen is attacked by the knight. But it's my move, so they can't take it. Haha. So I will take it first. Takes. Now I check. And that's sort of the whole point. I want to lure away the queen from the defense. And then I have this check. You go here, check again, here. And now we do what we romantically call a letter mate.
Queen e6.
Okay, and king g7.
Rook g8.
Yep. Here, king h7.
Queen g6.
And it's over. Yeah, very nice. So even though you see these positions and like, oh, they're so slow, Then Duda goes towards the end and it's bam, 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 over. So it was just game over. After queen h6 check, Wojtaszek immediately resigned. All right, so I wanted to show you this game, but I really wanted to show the game that I feel inspired Nepomniachtchi, who's playing the World Championship match against Ding Liren, to actually pick up this line. Because there was this guy called Carlsen, Magnus Carlsen, and he played against none other than Ding Liren himself. So same variation. So we're going to fast forward there. Here, rook e1, knight d2, bishop f8, h3. And instead of going for pawn d5 break, Ding chooses to keep it all nice and cushy and just go rook b8, keep this structure for now. Okay, so first of all, you may want to think about how you could gain some more space in this position. And you'll be like, I don't know theory, I don't know theory. Well, use your brain. And not the space bar. Never the space bar. So we always want to consider the center, right? It's a reasonable thing to consider. So you could go and play some like d4. Now it wasn't played in this game, but that doesn't mean that this is not legal. If you can get the center, most likely you're going to be better. Now he doesn't really go that way. He actually decides to take here, and go, wait, no, he didn't do that exactly. He played b4 first, here, and now took. And you might be asking, but hey, Denes, you told us you want extra space. But I have a response. You thought I didn't prepare for that. I did. So my answer is that either you gain space or you create a target. Where's our target? Potentially. It's b5. So even though it's not readily apparent when you're just getting used to the Spanish, the biggest weakness in the position is the a pawn and the b pawn, because it requires constant defense. And I know the confusion. You're like, hey, we've got like 9 pieces defending the b pawn. Why is that a weakness? The fact that you're wasting so much energy defending it gives the advantage for white, because they got better things to do than just defending a measly pawn that's worth only a pawn. And I mean, these guys are like altogether 8 pawns defending b5. So that's mismanagement, if you ask me. So d4. Now, I really hope none of you are shocked that we go and play d3, d4 here, because first you create this weakness and then you create a big center. And now you can actually claim an advantage, because we've got a 2-1 and they just only got 1 pawn in the middle. Knight g6, knight b3, rook a8. Okay, so I already gave a reason why rook a8 could be a good move, and it is indeed a splendid one by Ding. But can anybody tell me what is sort of the strategic idea behind the move rook b8 to a8?
If white takes, then the queen can take, and opening up, he's looking at the king diagonal, maybe?
Yeah, you do get a diagonal. You do get it. But also you get an open file. Oh, those are not my happiest arrows ever. Okay. Anyways, the point is, for one, you get rid of this active rook, which has an open file. Every rook you have, you want to have it on the open file in general. Oh no. You want to have that on the open file. Also, the thing is that rook a8, you want to trade in case you have less space. And at this moment, you have much less space as black. You got only one pawn in the middle. So every trade is going to favor you. Okay? Rook a8, bishop d2. So white is trying to avoid trades, and black is trying to enforce as much as possible. Takes, takes, queen c8, king h2, knight h5. So you look at this position and you're wondering, why does this very, very strong player, who's actually playing a world championship match by now, put the knight on the side of the board? That should already raise some flags. Something's up. But what's up? What's up? What's going on here? Yeah. They want to attack us a lot. It wants to jump to this square on f4, setting up threats on this pawn on h3. So you may be wondering, okay, how are we going to deal with that? And Carlsen's next move is brilliant because it does something very similar that we saw in the previous game, in the Duda game. He goes and plays a move that serves a dual purpose. No, you only panic when it's too late. It's not time to panic yet. You just have to recall where is potential target in black's position, and also a way to over-defend this side of the board. Bishop d3, very, very good. Why? Target. What are we going to do? We're going to go bishop f1. So, yeah, two birds with one stone. You make sure your king is all guarded, and the b5 pawn is being attacked or pressured. If you go knight g1, well, you may defend your king side, but you're not putting pressure on this pawn on b5. So he's sort of achieving and accomplishing both in this case. Knight f4, bishop f1, safely tucking this bishop into bed. And also has a very nice view on the king side. And now Ding's attack is sort of gone. c6, pawn takes, pawn takes. Of course you can't take here because your knight is hanging. D takes. Okay. So Ding managed to over-defend the b pawn, so that's no longer an issue. So we got to look for new pastures. And this is the moment you sort of wonder, and Magnus wondered, okay, I've got all these three pieces, which one can I improve? Can we improve the knight on f3? That's question number one. Yes?
How do you know when to exchange on e5, like Carlsen just did with the pawns? Like he released, like instead of like when he played d3 before.
We're going to talk about why this capture was good very shortly. But first, let's try to focus at the problem at hand, and I'll come back to that question, obviously. So, which one of these pieces can we improve? Or is there a reason to improve this knight?
Knight b3.
What?
Knight b3.
I'm not sure that, like the knight is on b3 already.
Yeah, improve that.
Oh, you improve that one. Okay, now I get it. So where would you put it?
C5.
Mm-hmm. Good. And it's actually what Carlsen is going to do shortly. Yeah, this knight isn't really doing much, right? It's just standing there. The closer you could get towards your opponent's pieces, the better. And that knight isn't doing too much, so its value is sort of low. This knight on f3 does its job, puts pressure on the e-pawn, and it's kind of fine. So bishop e3. So Carlsen is preparing the idea of knight c5. Possibly he could go knight c5 immediately. Sometimes in chess, the moves are interchangeable. But he goes bishop e3 first, and goes knight c5 now. Takes, takes. So I had the question, you asked me the question, why did we take on e5? Well, he saw no other way of progressing in his position. He felt, well, if I trade here, my knight actually will get this outpost, which otherwise he wouldn't, because the pawn will capture. So that is sort of the concept of taking on e5. Otherwise, it's not always that straightforward. Why would you take on that square? So here, let's see, e5 takes f6. Okay, so we improved our bishop. We have our knight in the right square. And there's actually only a couple more moves to find for Magnus, and he's going to completely take over. You're going to say why he took with the pawn instead of the bishop in a moment. And again, it's all about realizing how we can improve our pieces. This next move isn't spectacular. However, it's simple and strong at the same time. And if you just know basic strategy and what pieces like, that's what you do. So some people like to talk to their pieces, but you know, some pieces are introverted, so I don't approve of that completely. So it's just much better to know which piece belongs where. And then maybe you can start a conversation. So here rook d1 was played. Can we tell why we go rook d1? Well, we put the rook on the open file. Simple as that. So in chess, there are some basics. Knights to the outposts, pieces closer to the center, and rooks, you just put them on the open file or a file that's going to open up. So they'll be there and they'll be ready when action happens. So there are some simple general principles you can follow, and you don't always have to come up with a master plan. So here, rook d6. Notice what Carlsen is doing. He decided, I'm going to plonk that knight on d6. Whatever you do, he's following through his plan, and it turns out it works. Now, if they go here, I could still go here. Trades, you go here, I can over-defend this, and that's the point of capturing with the pawn and not the bishop, because now you can create a passed pawn on d6 that otherwise you wouldn't have. So this is again sort of thinking a couple of moves ahead, which makes this play by Magnus very deep and good. So king h7, rook d6, f5. Ding is doing the best he can. He's trying to muddy waters as much as possible. However, Carlsen just makes sure that never works. So captures here. You can't quite take here because the e-pawn is loose. So he captures this way. Knight d4. Problem is that black is all tied up. Knight e5. Queen b1. So technically, black is not down, not even a single pawn, but compared to the value of these pieces, white's position is overwhelming. Why? Well, this rook attacks this pawn. The bishop is almost completely useless. While I have pressure on f5 as well, and these doubled pawns are not quite great. So this is what we call a strategic play and a strategic masterpiece, where you don't necessarily win by force like we did in the other game, like in the Duda game. It was all tactics, bam, bam, you win, but more of just putting your pieces on ideal squares while misplacing your opponents. And here, Ding just collapses, and it's not his fault. His position is already really, really bad. G6, I mean, this wouldn't help either. You'd immediately lose a piece, because I have two defenders, and you don't have the majority, so you can't capture the piece back with enough piece. So I'm just winning. So it has to go G6, Queen C1. Little probing moves, but black is helpless. Here, takes, G5. It just shows, even if you take here, I just take. Now you lose the pawn, and you can't move. That's the worst. So G5, here, rook G8, Queen E4, Knight E6. Again, he's not taking risks, just trying to improve a couple of his pieces that he has. F6, Bishop D3. And you're going to cry while no one else is watching, because Queen H7 is incoming. That's game over. So these are the games I wanted to show you all. This is preparing like a pro. You see and you look at some examples of how to play a position, in this case the Spanish. You kind of get inspired by the game of your opponent, in this case Ding Liren. And even though this is not exactly the way you want to play, this does give you a footprint of how you could play against Ding. And actually, he managed to win that game in a very good style. So this is how you prepare like a pro. Thank you so much for coming and watching.